Welcome, Amber Bunting, to the In Your Mind podcast. Today we're going to talk a little bit about altered states of consciousness and what Amber is passionate about within that field. What led you to study altered states of consciousness and what really is it?
Mm-hmm. It's a long-winded road. When I was young, I had I had a lot of anxiety. I had OCD, and I was 13, and my dad taught me how to meditate, and he was like, "Let me teach you something." He taught me a 5-minute meditation, and it completely changed my life. It changed my mood. It changed, my anxiety was pretty much long gone at that point. My OCD way better. And I was just like, how does something so simple as being present, because that's really what meditation is, right? It's just an intentional practice of being present. How does something so simple have such a massive effect? So I did a psychology degree, and I did my honors, and now I've ended up in research. But it really started with meditation, and meditation is an altered state of consciousness is when your conscious experience of something is changed, whether maybe it's more vibrant, maybe time slows down, maybe you notice things that you don't usually notice. And so when you study meditation, naturally you also look at other ways that your consciousness can alter.
Yeah.
And that's how I ended up here.
Would you say, just quickly, like you mentioned, even when time slows down, would you say that like flow is an altered state of consciousness?
Absolutely.
I never really thought about it.
Yeah, neither. Because I just think of it as like drugs or sleep even, kind of, or I guess meditation as well. But if you're in a creative flow too.
Flow, or so I'm sure you guys have had maybe the experience of Kira, I'm sure, because you love the snow, like looking over the mountains and having this sensation of incomprehensibility of how incredible the world is. Like that is also an altered state of consciousness.
Right. Yeah, and that seems to be something that's in a lot of psychology papers and for treatments of depression, or it seemed to be like deeply ingrained in the past. Like it's something intuitively that we knew if we're seeking like outdoor experiences or things that bring us awe, then it's really beneficial to our mental health. But to also see it then as like an altered state because you can't comprehend.
It's like your perception in that moment. It's the way you're receiving the world is not the usual way that you receive the world. That's what categorizes an altered state.
Right.
Do you think, this is kind of a weird question. Do you think
Love
you need a balance between your quote unquote regular state of consciousness and a mixture of altered states? I guess it depends on what your goal is, but to be happy, I guess, as a really blanket term.
Yes, because I do think that being in an altered state a lot of the time, I mean, if you live in a world where you don't need to work, or you don't need to study, or you don't need to be a citizen in an established society, I mean, it would be nice to be in an altered state all the time, but you definitely do. I do think that there needs to be a balance, especially on how to apply, because what an altered state gives you is insight, and it kind of reshapes the way your brain is receiving information. So all of a sudden you learn how to interpret reality in a different way than your brain was used to. You definitely need to integrate that into a normal state of consciousness. Like, it's not like, you can always be shifting the way your brain perceives things. I think an altered state of consciousness is, if you want to get into the science of it, it really demands a lot of energy from your brain. It demands a lot of energy, because basically what it does is it tells your brain, hey, there's different pathways that we can go down, and there's different ways to interpret this information that you're getting, that's very exhausting for the brain. So you definitely need rest. Like we badmouth like being into patterns and being into like, oh, I'm stuck in patterns. Like sometimes that's good because your brain needs some rest. That's
Yeah. Yeah, it needs to go on autopilot for a couple seconds just to kind of reset. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense because, like, if you're doing something new and you're building new pathways, like you said, takes a lot of energy. And so you'd need to, like, balance that.
Yeah, and like your brain as well uses like, is it 20% of your glucose or something? Like it's, your brain is a huge part controlling for your whole system. Like it uses so much energy throughout your whole body. Yeah.
I mean, that's why we go on autopilot, right? It's like you can't be weightlifting at the gym the whole day. You're gonna get exhausted.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's not adaptive at some point. Yeah.
So with research then, what has your journey looked like through studying it?
Research, I started with the psych honors program, and I did exactly what I promised myself I was going to do when I was young. My research, my honors research, I found that meditation gives you a sense of control over your mind a lot more. And it's not like a sense of control that's like, what you'd get maybe with affirmations of like, I have a sense of control over my life. I have a sense of control of how I think. It's like this very momentary, embodied feeling of control over how you're thinking in that moment. And so that is really one of the key mechanisms through which meditation helps depression and anxiety and stress. And this led me to realize that a lot of the magic of meditation practice it's in those little moments. It's in the perceptual effects that it has on you. It's in it's like deeper experiential effects that end up having big chain reactions, like improving your mental health, for example. But the magic of it is in it's in the way that it changes your perception of things. This is very like a momentary thing.
So do you think that's conscious or that's unconscious?
So basically what Vipassana, the tradition that I'm very familiar with, does is that it tries to bring the unconscious to the conscious. So it tries to, basically the basic premise of Vipassana is that you can pay attention to every process that is occurring in your mind. If you're just silent enough, if you're just still enough, you can watch it happen. And so I think a lot of the benefit is it's probably not a direct answer, but the benefit is bringing the unconscious to the conscious.
Yeah, and I think that's probably like a big part of psychology as a whole, really, is about that. And like when you learn about historical or theories, like people that started it, and it's all about that element of bringing the unconscious conscious and rising things to the surface and recognizing patterns or recognizing where your thought goes. And then it sounds like the Vipassana is a way to do that yourself or facilitate that for yourself, which I feel like could be quite empowering as well.
Oh, absolutely. Because before we had to rely on certain psychologists to tell us, how do unconscious processes occur. And like that, a great example, a very famous example of that is Freud. He told us like, the reason why you do this is because unconsciously this is what's happening. And meditation is exactly what you're saying. It empowers us. It gives us the ability to watch it happen ourselves, watch the unconscious happen ourselves.
Yeah. So what are you researching now then, if you've started with Vipassana and did your thesis on that? What has that kind of led you to?
So I was really into meditation research, and then I went on retreat, and I had an experience of watching. So we talk about watching unconscious processes, I had an experience of watching myself create a sense of self. It's convoluted.
I don't think many people get to experience that.
Yeah.
They get further down in life and they have to like rediscover it. And they're like, there are some parts about it where like, damn, if I had control over that, which you do, and I feel like not a lot of people realize they do. Like, I probably wouldn't have put that part in about myself, you know? So that's really cool.
Was it kind of like an out-of-body experience, or like...
It's funny, it's not really an out-of-body experience. This is what I love about Buddhism, right? As a philosophy, as a set of scriptures, is that you have these experiences, and then you're like, what the heck was that? Like, what was that? And then you go and talk to a meditation teacher, and they're like, oh yeah, there's a name for that. There's a name for that. And basically the name for what I experienced is called watching eye making and my making. So it's the production of, you're almost generating or interpreting what's happening to you as me or I. And actually you can experience things without that lens. So that led me to research how does the brain generate the sense of I in these experiences, the sense of mine, like this is my experience. How does the brain come up with that? Because, you know, for 2,000, 3,000 years, Buddhists have been saying like it's a process. It's called I making, my making, and we do it.
Yeah.
So I wanted to bring that to psychology, and there's been some work on it already, and I'm just kind of expanding on it now.
So how far have you gotten? Like, where are we at in terms of understanding the psychology behind it?
So in its infancy, like totally it's in its infancy. The thing with self is that it can be approached by neuroscience very well. It can be approached by maths. It can be approached by physics, but it also needs to be approached by philosophy, because in the end, talking about something so nuanced about an experience, you know, you need some philosophy in there. And basically what's happening right now in science is that they're still trying to grapple, how do we bring such a philosophical concept to science? And that's kind of what I'm trying to work on. How do we bring the ineffable, you know, to a physicalist or a materialist view, something that we can understand with scientific terms and components. So it's in its infancy.
It's kind of what we were talking about last week with like quantum mechanics, like spirituality and science, like overlapping.
Yeah, that there's so many different facets and you can bring them all together to find like commonalities, and it's kind of just taking parts of everything.
It's quite a creative process. Yeah.
Yes, it's totally a creative process. Totally.
It's not really something you'd think about as a creative thing. Like if you were to explain like what you study to people, that wouldn't be immediately what you would think, but it would be a large part of the way you think, really.
It's shaped my perception a lot because I guess I see how other people understand it in like scientific terms, and I have to be creative and say like, no, there's a different way of understanding it. But I guess that's research in general. Yeah, it is a creative process, that's for sure. I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Is there anybody in this field, like obviously you're saying it's like very new and just starting, but is there anyone that you are drawn to or that you think you've learnt a lot, like a particular researcher or just anything really?
I wish there was. I think possibly there is this one researcher that has been looking at, so what I study is this I guess formally what you'd call this phenomenon of subjectivity is called minimal self. And there's one researcher who's at Columbia University he looks at how minimal self is altered during the use of psychedelics.
Mm.
And I think he's kind of, yeah, if I were to trust anyone to go in the right direction with this research, it would probably be him.
Yeah. So how would you say the self and the ego can be explored through meditation?
So it's a lot what I was saying of like, I'll give you like an anecdotal quote.
Mm.
Supposedly what the Buddha said just before hitting enlightenment was, "I see you, little housemaker." He sees the construction of things. He sees how we construct like a whole mental world. And so it's that's the process, right? Is what meditation gives you is, it's like this bird's eye view or this objective view of what your mind is doing. And there's a common misconception about how mindfulness is about extinguishing ego, when there's nothing to be extinguished. It's the fact that if you watch it enough, you realize it doesn't have to be that way. You're not stuck to that interpretation of things anymore. Meditation helps you realize what you're doing, right? And through that, it's almost like you're out of the chains. You have more liberty of what to do with your conscious experience in that moment. In neuroscience terms, it's giving your brain a chance to act outside of its learned patterns.
Yeah.
And ego is just another one of those things.
Yeah, it's kind of like understanding like the animal that's inside you. And then you can like, yeah. I mean, it's important, like you said, a lot of people feel like it's a bad thing, like, oh, my ego gets in the way all the time or whatever, but it's there for a reason. And a lot of times, like, it's to keep you like centered in this reality.
So I touched on it before, but there's an increasingly adopted view of the way the brain works. Basically, it's called Bayesian brain theory. So basically what it says is that your brain has these models on how to interpret the world so it doesn't light up like crazy all the time. And you can think of self as one of the most basal or foundational models. It's one of the things that most gives you stability. It's a filter through which to perceive the world that is almost omnipresent. It's always there. So in that sense, having a self model is extremely helpful. It's not, it's not all bad.
Yeah. Yeah, because it gives you some sort of grasp on reality and maybe a way then to interact with others and to bring about your experience, and you perceive I've experienced this, this and this, and from those experiences I've formed who I am, and I can now interact with somebody else who's had different or similar experiences and use language, but talk about my experience versus their experience.
It's important like that for connection. It's important for, I was talking to my dad about this. It's adaptive in the sense of survival. Like feeling like you're a separate self from other gives you some fuel for competition, some fuel for productivity. It's necessary for survival. It's ego, and that's why a lot of people who go on this endeavor to extinguish ego in the most extreme form, they need to be isolated. They need to be in retreat. They need to be in monastery. They need to be taken care of, because extinguishing ego radically changes the way that you function in the world. It's not a light endeavor, I guess.
Yeah, it would probably also as a motivating factor, like you need some sort of ego or self. I mean, as you kind of said with competition, to have motivation to do anything, you need a drive behind you. So to accomplish things and to progress as a society, as a self, as anything, you want some sort of motivation or ego backing that and saying, this is my ideal self, this is my, like, what I want to achieve, this is my ego, but it's helping fuel me. Yeah. But it's good to have some sort of reins or something on it.
Totally.
Yeah.
I think where it starts to get maladaptive is when you start living your life for that ego. Like my dad, he calls them unfulfillable contracts. So once you have this established sense of self, like I'm Amber, I enter into these unfulfillable contracts, which is just how, you know, human psychology works, is Amber will be cool if Amber has this. Amber will be loved if Amber has this. Amber will be I don't know, worthy if Amber has this. So I think the maladaptive part of the ego starts when we focus on ourselves with this sense of not enoughness. Like usually when you don't, in those experience of egolessness, you're like, of course I'm enough. I'm enough because all of this is enough. Like you have this sense of unity, and of course there's nothing wrong with me, because that means that there's something wrong with everything. Anyways, you have these experience of unity. So it's more about how you deal with your sense of self, I think. And what meditation helps you do is, yes, the end of the road is extinguishing ego, or realizing that ego can fall away and that you don't need to have it. But it's also how can we keep it yet still treat it in a way that benefits us.
If you were to fully extinguish the ego, is that what you would call being enlightened? Or just have full, would you say control? What's the best way to describe that?
I think enlightenment is like, I think it varies from tradition to tradition, but in Vipassana, you reach, I guess formally, you reach enlightenment when you realize three things. No self, so you've realized the insubstantiality of ego, that it's just a mind construction. You realize that everything's impermanent, every phenomena, every bit of perceptual information that you get, every emotion, every experience you have is just passing. And suffering, which is, it sounds a bit dire, but basically it's like one of the truths of existence, that we're always suffering, and a lot of our actions are based on trying to diminish suffering. So when I move my leg, for example, it's because I'm uncomfortable, and that drove me to do certain things. So it's just the acceptance that suffering exists, and it's pervasive, and like it's always in our lives.
Can we stay there for a second? Suffering. So would you say a large part of why meditation is beneficial is because you're, I don't know if forcing is quite the right word, but I'm going to use it, forcing yourself to like sit in the suffering for a little while and to understand that you're going to be okay, you know, like the emotion arises and then the emotion leaves if you let it?
Yes, it teaches you non-reactivity. It teaches you that suffering will come, and you'll feel suffering, and you'll feel pain, and you'll feel discomfort, but you don't have to act on it because it will pass as well. And that's just how things work. You don't have to react to everything. It teaches your brain to be able to sit with something that it doesn't like and not have it define your next action or the way you feel.
I think it's been something I've been really thinking about, is how our brain will constantly grab to negative states because it's something that, like, biologically within us, we are reactive to it because it's fearful. It could be a threat.
Survival, yeah.
Survival. Like, we're always in that kind of state of slight suffering or slight, like, anticipation of it. And with the realization of it'll pass, that's really the key to releasing some of that suffering, but also like leaning into it kind of, and then it seems to dissipate as well. I read a book about Buddha like quite recently, and one of the quotes in it was like, "And that shall pass too, and thou shall pass too," or something. And that's kind of just what you said as well.
Yeah, it's the negativity bias, and there's a really awesome neuroscientist, Dr. Rick Hansen, that teaches that yes, we have the negativity bias because it's evolutionarily beneficial to pay attention to the negative, but you don't have to. And the way that you can change that is through meditation. The way that you can shift the negativity bias to, I don't know, focusing on all aspects, not just the negative ones. I have a hard time calling feelings negative. I don't like this thing of like a feeling's positive or a negative. I don't enjoy that distinction. It's just a feeling, like it is what you make it, like a uncomfortable feeling maybe, or a feeling of pain, let's say. There's things we latch onto. But basically, Rick follows the basic premise that the whole of meditation and currently the science of altered states of consciousness, your brain works a certain way in perceiving reality and having experiences, but it doesn't have to. It can work a different way.
Yeah.
It just gives you the ability to change it if you're not benefiting from it as much as you could be from, a different way.
That's exactly it.
I think for me, something that makes me not focus like on the negatives a lot is just gratitude, like a practice of gratitude, or just if I feel myself slipping into negative things, I'm like, oh, but look at that pretty leaf, or like, oh, but the sun's sparkling so nice over here, and then listening to music or something that just changes it.
That's one of Rick's recommendations is if you're feeling that you're too focused on everything that's going wrong, then maybe try to be grateful for things as they are. You know, there's so much to be grateful for, and that's something that I have to thank, I guess, meditation a lot, is that it kind of helps me as well feel like things don't have to be this way. I can think of it in a different way. I can quite literally, physically perceive it in a different way. There's studies on how meditation opens up your hearing pathways, the parts of your brain that interpret sound. It lets those parts light up more. It's like you can physically change your perception by being present, by letting those models of how to perceive the world fall away.
I really like what you said about not liking calling some emotions negative. And I think that's a very like Buddhism term of just like not attaching to things. And I guess that's like the whole topic of this conversation, and ego. Like, I think, so much damage just comes from deciding that something is bad for you instead of like kind of just accepting it and understanding it for what it actually is at the core, and, not making it harder for yourself because you think it's harder. Does that make any sense? Yeah.
That makes total sense. And I saw someone talking the other day about how an emotion actually only takes, if you just let it happen, it only takes 90 seconds to pass it. So your body just needs 90 seconds with that emotion, and it's basically has been processed and passed. When we call something negative, what we're doing is being like, this is negative, I don't want to feel it, so I'm not going to process it. But you store that, and another thing, you start running away from it, and then that defines your life. I was laughing with a friend the other day of like how much running away from negative emotions like controls your life.
Yeah.
And then if you just kind of shift your perspective, like, this isn't negative, this is just another emotion that I guess I got when signing the contract in the ether of being a human. Like, during my human experience, I'm going to have emotions, and this is just another one. And it's not negative, it's just an emotion.
Yeah. I think as well with emotions, something that's I've been starting to think about when they get very big and large is about the experience that it's an emotion. It's not necessarily even my emotion. Like everybody can experience this emotion, and it's just emotion arising. Like I don't have to attach to it, and that also can help a lot too. Like everybody is experiencing frustration or anxiety and happiness and good times, and every emotion is normal. I think it comes back to that too. Yeah.
And that's very linked to the self, because sometimes you'll feel an emotion and here comes the story of the self, like this emotion's happening because I have this pattern and I have this childhood trauma and I have this wound and tendency, and this emotion means something, and it's like then you get fixated on it, and again then it ceases being an emotion, and it's just this other construction that you've made by like applying it to some story of yourself that you have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I loved your narration. Here comes the self.
Here it
sliding
comes.
on in.
But you can really see it like that.
Totally. It's the self story. Like it's narrative. It's a narration that you go through for sure. Because in the end, like we need to be piecing everything together, right? Like it's very incomprehensible to live a life or like live on this earth and not have something to tie it all together. Do you know what I mean? And like that's okay. So now we have the self. Again, what I was saying before, I think the maladaptive part of the self, of ego, that the one that makes you suffer is the one who like is, if you keep applying self to things, one, sometimes you're not going to process emotions. Two, you're going to be stuck in the same model, like the same basal model that your brain has to perceive things, and other problems which I don't want to go into. But it's just the hard part about ego is when it doesn't serve you anymore, and that's an example of how it may not serve you.
So for someone who feels like a part of their ego is not serving them, or they're struggling with that story or the self-narration that they create when they feel this emotion, what would you say would be some of the first steps to like moving in the right direction and kind of, removing yourself from the ego so much?
I would say that the direct opposite of the ego is there's a tradition that calls it groundlessness. It's the recognition that everything that happens is just this dynamic interaction of emotions and physical sensations and etc. So it's applying a little bit of that idea to the sensation or the emotion that comes up. So usually an emotion will come up and we'll get into construction, we'll get into all of this narration. And a useful thing to do is, instead of going down that route, can we bring it closer to the opposite route of seeing it as this impersonal dynamic happening of things? And a way to do that, I know this awesome meditation teacher, Patrick Kearney. He says that when something arises, ask yourself simple questions. Is it hot or is it cold? Is it moving or is it still? I can't remember exactly the other two. The basic premise is, can you pay attention to what it actually is physically? What is it physically? Because then you're moving away from interpreting it through the self lens, and now you're interpreting it through an more objective lens.
It's like you're someone else trying to figure out what's going on. Like if your friend was feeling like this, like these are, like maybe not those questions specifically, but that's a really good way to figure it out. from the outside, quote unquote.
Or to even just to try and understand it and to describe it, to describe the sensations, is to look at it through not really a negative or a positive, but through physical sensation and curiosity. And I think the lens of like just curiosity and deep feeling can help ground you and root you.
Sorry, another one of those questions is it pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? And can you just stick with that interpretation of how it makes you feel? Is it pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? If it's unpleasant, can you just stick with the interpretation? It's unpleasant, it's a cold feeling, it's moving around in my shoulders or in my legs. Like, can you just, can you just look at it impersonally a little bit, see it for what it is? And that's why altered states of consciousness can be understood so much through mathematics and physics, because it's simply about looking at aspects of reality in a more objective way. And the fact that your brain can do it if you just put the effort in is a gift. And it's been proven, like we have, again, what I said, we have neuroscience backing it, we have physics backing it, we have maths backing it. It's a real way to like deal with things, I think. And I do think it's really beneficial. One of the key catalysts of depression or contributing factors of depression is what they call negative rumination. When an unpleasant feeling comes, we believe that if we ruminate it on it enough, then maybe we can resolve it, or if we apply it enough to ourselves, maybe we can resolve it. And it just gives you a tool to, when those things come up, to just take a step back,
Yeah, it's something we talk about a lot on this podcast. Like, pain, like, has a purpose. Like, it's coming to you for a reason. And it's really only there to teach you something, and then it leaves, And if it's still there, then you haven't really learned the lesson yet. And you really can only learn the lesson if you're, like you said before, still enough and quiet enough. Yeah.
Non-reactive. Yeah. I mean, it's the belief, a lot of the, I think we're getting a little bit off topic, but a lot of the reason why we don't process pain very well is because we believe it's going to last forever. I better leave it in that corner. I better just avoid it, because if I feel it, like, then that's going to be my reality. But the reality is that your brain can literally not hold a state for very long. It's actually seconds. It gives you the gift of learning non-reactivity.
Yeah, so you can stop like having an avoidant perspective on any negative feeling or state or experience, and instead lean into something, even if it does make you uncomfortable for a couple seconds, like knowing that it won't last long, and practicing it through a meditation or through through just knowing that it will pass, and that you've only got a little bit of time with it, so just let it be, calm yourself, and it'll be fine. Like, it's not going to kill you. Yeah.
Exactly. Removing ego from all of that is also super helpful, because all of a sudden it's not this grandiose thing that means something to this identity that I have, to this, and it's just a phenomenon, It's not, it doesn't have this grandiose meaning related to myself.
Yeah.
It's just something that's arising. I can experience it, and it passes. That's the whole premise of working on ego. It's just diminishing addictive patterns of avoidance and clinging.
So how do you think, through studying the processes of meditation and now delving into the self and the ego, how has it really affected your experience in your life, like your perception of your human experience and where you want to go now through learning about this?
Me, it's been more of like a validation, because I'm sure you can relate to this. When you start having these realizations, and if you were to think about it scientifically, if you started having these opportunities to perceive things differently than you've kind of conditioned yourself to perceive them, sometimes you start thinking you're going crazy, or sometimes it's a lot and you don't know what to do with it. And a lot of people misinterpret that, and they think consciousness work is this wooey mystical thing, but studying this has really solidified for me that no, we're dealing with state of the art neuroscience, like the money that is being poured into this research, the significance that it has. I mean, AI wouldn't be where it is today without this kind of research, without this understanding of how the brain works,
100%.
how we interpret things, like the fields that are contributing to this are like what people think of as pure science or hard science. We have people in computational physics, we have people in quantum physics, we have mathematicians, we have neuroscientists, people, biologists, we have like chemists, we have so many people saying that, hey, this is something that's really worthwhile exploring, and it's something that's happening. Altered states of consciousness mean something to the brain, and they can tell us a lot about the most fundamental way the brain works. I guess for me, it's just been more about a validation that these things are important to reflect on, and it's deepened my practice in that way, because I almost have more trust in that what I'm doing isn't like some crazy thing, or like I'm like updating my like my perceptions to like, and it's way too trippy and I'm gonna fall out of reality and stuff like that. Like it's given me a sense of like safety and security in doing it, and in knowing that it's knowing what's going on in the brain, basically.
Yeah. Would you say like it helps you reach like peace or contentment? What do you think is like the best way to describe that state for someone who...
What state?
Like when you've reached a point where you can update your perceptions and you don't have to attach to your emotions and stuff like that.
What does it bring me?
How would you describe that state for someone who is stuck in the identifying with their emotions? Like, how would that feel and what would that look like so that they could start moving towards that on their journey? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. It feels like freedom to me, like a deep sense of freedom, because this image just popped up in my mind of like a parent grabbing a kid's hand and like dragging them around, and the kid thinks like, oh, I have to be dragged around by this parent. The moment that you practice these things is the moment where the kid realizes, I actually can just let go of her hand and I can just go where I want to go. It's like, it's the recognition that I am some of the reasons why I suffer are my own doing. And more than that is that I don't have to do that. So it's like this, sometimes I'll catch myself before reacting and I'll apply some of these principles. And the profound sense of freedom of like, I can choose what to do right now with this emotion, with this thought, with this anything. I have this freedom. It's choiceful, maybe is a good word to say. And with the freedom comes joy, and with the freedom comes this sense of lightness and ease. And what I found in my research last year is it breeds a sense of effortlessness in your experience. And so it's like all of a sudden things are a little bit more free flowing, and it just provides this lightness to your being. It's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah.
opens up all your possibilities, really. Like you can really then start living. Yeah.
Totally. I have this friend, and he was like, because I have a lot of friends in my lab, and he was like, you guys really do life. And I was like, I took months to understand what he meant, but then I probed it a little bit, and I guess what he's trying to say is like, I guess when you have those tools, you can choose what to do more with your life. And being able to choose, when you can choose what to do with your life, you can choose really awesome things. You know, like when you can choose how to react, you can choose a really awesome reaction. You can choose a very adaptive reaction, a very constructive reaction.
Yeah.
It just breeds joy and
You become the creator.
Yeah. Creator of your life.
That's sick.
Yeah, it's very like mindset as well. Like, you know, when you listen to like development coaches or like mindset kind of ideas, and it's really at the core of that, and the core of, you know, choosing your life is based with consciousness and with how you choose to perceive any object, anything, any sensation. Like, yeah, it really shows you from a different level how that just comes to be, like how you can inflict your own reality, you create your own reality.
totally.
You know, you inject what you want and then you create that.
Absolutely. I'll give you a really cool piece of science. This is still on the Bayesian brain theory. Basically, what they are finding more and more is that when you perceive something, your model of how the world works isn't picking and choosing what to perceive based on what it expects. It's also changing the perception of something to meet your expectations of what it should feel like.
Yeah.
You're quite literally choosing how to perceive things. You're further away from the actual reality of visuals or of tactile sensations, because your brain quite literally has the power to change the perception of something. Yet we are here convinced that the way I feel things is the real thing. It's
reality.
not. You're making your reality. Like quite physically, you know, a lot of people say to me, like, I don't believe in that stuff because I believe in science and I believe in hard facts. And I'm like, trust me.
And you can explain it to them, but it's hard because the concepts are very new and it's all over the shop.
The terminology isn't defined and all. Like we feel it, we understand it, but we just can't.
Like if you talk to some of the most knowledgeable neuroscientists in the world, they're going to tell you the same thing. Like it's called top-down processing. We're changing our reality. For sure, we have the power to do that.
Oh, it's so exciting. It's only just the beginning.
Do you want to ask the guest questions?
Oh, yeah.
We're going to get into your ego now. We have these 3 questions that we ask every guest. And so the first one is, if you could have the body of 2 animals combined, any animals, real or mythical, what would they be and why?
I have to give you a kind of disappointing response to that, because the first thing that comes to my mind is one of my favorite movies, which is Napoleon Dynamite, and when he drew the liger.
That's so good.
I have the image of his drawing of the liger. So, like, yes, definitely a liger.
I mean, that's not disappointing.
That's not disappointing.
I feel like if you're a liger, you can't really complain.
Yeah, that's cool.
I feel like it would be cool to be like a lion and a bird, because you have like more, I guess, skills. Like a lion and a tiger are basically very similar.
Yeah.
Maybe a lion and an eagle, because then I'd be like a lion with wings.
Yeah, and the next one is, what is one thing that you've learnt about yourself or have done in the past 3 years that you're most proud of?
I have to say that one of the things that I'm most proud of myself for doing is exactly what we've been talking about. teaching myself and implementing this way to interpret things, because it's not easy. Like, we can talk about it. And, you can talk about how neuroscience like proves it and whatever, but doing it is very hard, and it requires looking sometimes into very deep, I guess, things that you've accrued from maybe your childhood. And I think that's possibly the most proud thing the thing that I'm most proud of is seeing that I've done that in some ways, and all the good things it's brought to myself and also the people around me.
Yeah.
What do you want people to
Remember you for?
I think I want people to remember me as they already kind of think of me, which is as a person who questions a lot. And, sometimes I'll meet someone that's very like, I guess they're suffering, but if I question it enough, sometimes, does it have to be that way? Like, can we look at that? Does it have to be that way? Because if you take all these laws from physics and maths and biology, like, it doesn't have to be that way. And so maybe the way I'd like to be remembered is someone who questions things. Yeah.
That's dope.
That's awesome. Well, thanks so much, Amber, for coming on the podcast and for having a chat with Brendan and I today. Like, it was so good to hear about, the self and the ego and your experiences and your findings, because it's something I feel like we both talk about a lot constantly. Like, we love that kind of thing, and questioning and being curious about these like deep topics that are kind of coming to fruition. And it's a really exciting endeavor, and it's cool that you're a part of it. And I'm so glad we got the chance to chat.
Yeah, thanks, Kira. I mean, it's equally as rewarding to find other people in this space. Like, just having a lab right now is like, I've met so many people that are interested in this work, and we're, we're trying to bring it to fruition, exactly what you said. So as well, like, sharing it has been a pleasure. So thanks for having me as well.
Yeah.
Hopefully a lot of more people will come around to it, because I think it's so universal. Like, everyone struggles with stuff. Everyone, has emotions. And if you can get over that, then everyone can just live a happier, better life. Yeah.
The Buddha called it the human condition. There's
Yeah.
one thing that we cannot escape from, and it's the human condition.
Yeah.
And it involves all of that stuff.
Well, thank you so much again. And have a great rest of your day. And
Thanks everyone for listening.